This meeting is being recorded.
Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam virasya vaidagena yopakrutam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartrasutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. In the last session, we were discussing the second sutra, and then we also started our discussion on the third sutra. The second sutra is Samadhi Bhavanarthaha Klesha Tanukaranarthaha. That means it is a description of the purpose of Kriya Yoga. So in Sanskrit, before the Samadhi Bhavanartha, you have to add the word Saha, means that. What we were discussing in the last session. That's the meaning. So what we were discussing, Saha, that is Kriya Yoga. Tapaswadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. Ascetic practices, then Karma Yoga, then resignation to God's will, reading scriptures, chanting, meditation, contemplating on the sacred word symbols or mantras, either Omkara, Gayatri, or any holy word symbol in any religious spiritual tradition. All these constitute the first step. That's how we enter spiritual life. So this is not just in the context of beginning yoga or spiritual life. Here yoga means spiritual life. That's a broad sense in which the word yoga is used here. So these disciplines constitute our entrance into spiritual life, because these disciplines help us to create new samskaras, new impressions, new vrittis, new attitudes, so that we will be able to do good things, we will be able to undertake noble activities without any internal conflict. So that is in a broad sense what is implied by the word Kriya Yoga, the first sutra of Sadhanapada. The second sutra, that is Samadhi Bhavanarthaha Klesha Tanukaranarthaha. It describes the purpose of this Kriya Yoga. What does Kriya Yoga do? First, it takes us all the way, not immediately, but in the long term, after practicing different disciplines mentioned in the Yoga Sutras, it will take you all the way to Samadhi. So Samadhi is the word used here. Samadhi here means Samprajnata Samadhi. So that is the goal. In fact, you have to go beyond that, asamprajnata yoga or asamprajnata samadhi. That is the final goal. But before that, we reach this particular penultimate state. It's called samprajnata samadhi. So when you read the sutra, you have to add another Sanskrit word, saha. That is this Kriya Yoga that we discussed so far. It will bring about samadhi, that is the higher concentration. In the Samadhi Pada, in the 17th sutra, you find this particular sutra which defines Samprajnata Samadhi, Vidarka Vichara Ananda Asmita Anugama Samprajnataha. So that's, anyway, we will not discuss that because it comes in Samadhi Pada. And in the 18th sutra, Asampragnata samadhi, the higher concentration, is mentioned. So if you begin your life, if you begin your education in a kindergarten and do very well in those preliminary classes, or if you join a primary school and do extremely well in the examinations in the primary school, then there is a certainty that eventually when you continue your journey in education, one day you will end up in a big university, you may end up getting a PhD degree. So that is the Sampragnata Samadhi. Another purpose is mentioned here, klesha tanukaranam. Klesha tanukaranarthaka means weakening or making it less effective kleshas, klesha vrittis. So now, these are all interrelated subjects, but I shall try to explain what are kleshas that are described in the next sutra. So these sutras are interrelated. So if you really want to master Yoga Sutra, then it is essential that everyone should memorize all the 195 sutras. That is of course not something that we can contemplate right now, but what we can do, we should keep in mind these sutras are interrelated. So kleshas are implied in the second sutra and kleshas are listed in the third sutra. What are the kleshas? Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, pancha klesha. So what are kleshas? Kleshas, you may call it afflictions. What do they really mean in our life? There are certain vrittis, certain emotions, feelings, tendencies, some of them even obsessive tendencies, some of them in the form of extreme liking for certain things, some of them in the form of extreme aversion for certain things, some of them continuing haunting our life throughout in the form of unknown fear, in the form of irrational hatred for things, and in the form of irrational infatuation to certain things. Where drug addiction, gambling, alcoholism belong to one category. Some kind of extreme aversion to certain things belong to another category. And then among these 5 kleshas, the most difficult kleshas to understand is the 5th one, abhinivesha. So I shall try to explain this abhinivesha. And against that background, you will be able to understand other kleshas. Because abhinivesha is something very interesting, very peculiar. Yoga Sutra tells you, or rather Patanjali and the commentators like Vijnana Bhikshu, who wrote Yoga Bhashya Vartigam, and Vajaspati, who wrote Visharadi, and other commentators will tell you something very interesting. This abhinivesha means clinging to life. That is how it is mentioned in the simple translation. But in real life, it takes the form of a constant fear of losing our life, fear of death. Now, that again in plain English language, it is something very scary. So we shall try to explain it. It can be explained in pure psychological terms. Yoga Sutra tells you that you cannot have any of these kleshas without some previous experience. So in the Yoga Bhashya Vartika, Vijnana Bhikshu says, even a worm that is just born shows a tendency to run away from a possible danger. That is something very interesting. And in the same way, a man is afraid of losing his money, because losing money can eventually lead him to pain, grief, sufferings, which may eventually take him to further pains and eventually the greatest pain, loss of life. Now, why does the worm run away from a possible danger? Swami Vivekananda, not in the context of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, in this particular sutra, but in one context, Swamiji says, he draws an interesting comparison. Of course, in another context, but that story is very apt for the present context. A worm is traveling on a railway track, and a huge locomotive is coming from the opposite direction. The locomotive is maybe billions of times as powerful, as fast, as strong as the worm. I mean, incomparably stronger, faster, and bigger. But locomotive cannot change its track unless somebody else applies his brain, the driver. But a worm can change its track if it wants. Now, that's because the worm, if it smells a possible danger to its life, it may change the track, because he's moving along the track. Suddenly he has a huge noise, some kind of sensitivity, and it may just step out of the track and save its life. Now, actually Vijnana Bhikshu says something very similar. Even a humble creature, just born, will have a tendency to move away from what it considers to be dangerous to its life. That shows it had that previous painful experience sometime in the past. Not in this life, in previous life. So, Vijnana Bhikshu says there is a proof for rebirth or reincarnation and the doctrine of karma. So, karma, vritti, samskara, sankalpa, vasana, chakram. There is an eternal cycle. So Vijnana Bhikshu, those who are interested can listen. I shall translate it in English. Vijnana Bhikshu's own language. Sarvasya praninaha iyam atmasir nitya bhavati. This abhinivesha, clinging to life, it is not for some time or in certain context. Say raga, extreme liking for certain things, is also one of the 5 kleshas that Patanjali lists in the 3rd sutra of Sadhanapada. Avidya, asmida, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Raga is extreme liking. Not all the time. It doesn't chase you all the time. It doesn't haunt your life all the time. And also dvesha, extreme aversion, irrational aversion. That is also not present all the time. But there is something always present in our life. That is our clinging to life, a desire to continue living till eternity. In fact, in one of the philosophical dialogues in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira was asked a question by an angel, Yaksha Prasna it is called. Set a dialogue where the divine being called Yaksha, some celestial being something like an angel in Christian mythological tradition, so to speak. He appears before the king Yudhishthira. Of course, I am not going to the whole story. And if King Yudhishthira could answer all the questions, he will be able to save his brothers. That's the context of the story. So Yaksha goes on asking questions. And one important question is, what is the most mysterious, wonderful thing in this world? So the answer is, every day, every minute, somebody or something leaves her or his body. Means somebody is dying. Every day, every minute. either some worms, ants, cockroaches, insects, human beings, just disappear, will die. But every living human being thinks that he will not die anytime. He will live till eternity. This is the most wonderful, mysterious thing in this whole universe. That is the answer given. And he got a pass mark, and the angel gave life to all his brothers. That's how the story ends. So here, Vijnana Bhikshu says, Sarvasya praninaha iyam atmasir nitya bhavati. Every creature, every living being has got this atmasi, the desire to live, clinging to live. Atmasi, it is called in Sanskrit. Mana bhuvam bhuyasamiti. Nacha ananubhuta marana dharmagasya esha bhavati atmasihi. Now, if a person feels that, well, if I fall sick, I may die. If I become poor, if I lose my money, that may hasten my death, that may quickly shorten my lifespan. That's because that person has experienced death sometime in the past. Unless he has experienced death in previous life, he will not be afraid of death. So it may be natural death, but somehow that person had to cease to exist. So he was born again. That's why nacha ananubhuta marana dharmagasya esha bhavati atmasi. Unless the person has experienced an anubhuti of leaving this body sometime in the past, he will not have a lingering fear of death in this life. Etayacha purvajana anubhava pratiyate. Therefore, it is obvious that this person had a previous life and he died in his previous life after living maybe 100 years or even longer and was born again. So that constant memory from previous life is haunting him. That is the real reason. That is the mother of all anxieties, worries and problems we are facing. What is the mother of all anxieties and worries? Fear of death. That Vedanta also makes similar statements. In many scriptures you find this. Bhashyakara, Shankaracharya himself says. Sacha ayam abhinivesha kleshas surasavahi krimerabi jadamatrasya. Now this abhinivesha, krimi means worm. Even a little worm that is living in a mud pool, if you just take a pole and stir the filthy water, the bacteria and all other creatures suddenly start moving about. It is afraid of dying. That is what Vijnana Bhikshu says. Surasavahi means it is its own characteristic. It's like a river flowing endlessly. So actually this is carried forward from life to life. This memory of death and the consequent lingering to life, and the false notion that we will always be alive is something very interesting. Without this, actually human beings will not be able to carry on their daily life. Without this maybe false notion that we are eternal. So there are two forces working within us. On the one hand, the idea that I am going to be eternal, I can be eternal if I want, that links us to our Atman, our spiritual dimension, our true nature, that is Atman, which never dies, which continues to exist, which travels from life cycle to life cycle. It never dies, it is eternal, it is immortal. But then the fear, that is linked to the physical body. That's what Vijnana Bhikshu was not a Vedanti in that sense, but that's the implication. Pratyaksha anumana agamaihi asambhavito maranatrasa ucheda drishtiyatmakaha Purvajanmanubhutam maranadukham anubhapayati. So, and he argues, in fact, this great commentator, the author of Yoga Bhasha Vartiga, he says, this experience is coming from previous life, and this fear is based on this experience in previous life, because you cannot have that idea of death either through pratyaksha pramana, direct perception, inference, or verbal testimony. Any other knowledge you can see directly with your eyes and mind, or ears and mind, or you can use any of the five senses and mind. Using together, you can see things, you can know about things by seeing, you can know about things by hearing, you can know about things by smelling, by touching, by taste, or you can inference. If you see smoke somewhere, you can infer the possibility of fire in the neighborhood. Or you can read a book. So, Vijnana Bhikshu says either Pratyaksha Pramana, Anumana Pramana, or Agama Pramana, you can know many things. But the memory of death in previous life, you cannot know unless you have experienced in your own previous life. So that experience through vrittis, vasanas and samskaras are deposited in the Chittam, and that's what really makes us this abhinivesha. Now, one important point is this abhinivesha is the most powerful klesha. Actually, it causes so many other problems. It is linked to all other kleshas. So it's all based on avidya. Avidya means our ignorance of our true nature. In the context of yoga and sankhya, we do not remember, or we don't always keep in mind that we are the Purusha, the effulgent one. We are not part of the Prakriti, we are not part of the evolved world. We are the ever effulgent reality that we sometimes forget. That is avidya. And as a result of this, we have the wrong egoity, wrong identification, that is asmita. And as a result of this, we have extreme liking for certain material things, or an extreme aversion for certain material things, which are conditioned by circumstances. But there is, at the end, there is abhinivesha. Abhinivesha is something that is always accompany us, all the time. Nobody forgets that probability. Abhinivesha means lingering to life based on the previous memory of death that a person may have experienced in previous life. This is how Yoga Sutra explains our human impulses, feelings and emotions on the basis of our experiences, not only in this life, but also in previous life. Now we will take up each one of these kleshas. So those of you who got the book can remember. We are going to discuss the fourth sutra. Avidya kshetram uttaresham prasupta tanu vichinodaranam. What is avidya? Avidya is nothing but is a breeding ground. Kshetram is a breeding ground, field or something. Breeding ground for all other kleshas. Avidya is responsible for all the kleshas, including abhinivesha. But abhinivesha is linked to all the other kleshas, because raga and dvesha are also connected to abhinivesha. But all the four kleshas emerge from this avidya, our our absence of true knowledge. I mean, we wrongly identify ourselves with our mind, our body and intellect, forgetting that behind and beyond all this, there is one eternal, immortal reality, that is Atman, according to Vedanta, and according to Yoga, it is called Purusha. So this avidya or ignorance is the breeding ground, kshetram, for all of the kleshas. They exist in the four states. So this avidya exists, is present, because avidya is the substratum for all other four kleshas, including abhinivesha. That's why it is called, prasupta tanu vichinodaranam, means it exists all other four states. Dormant. Dormant means prasupta. It's almost like asleep. It's repressed. And or sometimes could be freely expressed. Abhinivesha may not be always expressed. Fear of death, clinging to life may not be always expressed. It can sometimes be repressed, but it's always present. Raga and dvesha, extreme liking for certain things, infatuation, extreme hatred for certain things may be expressed, but they are all based on the substratum, that is avidya. The next sutra is fifth one. Anitya asuchi dukkha anatmasu nitya suchi sukha atmakhyadi avidya. So what is avidya is mentioned here. Avidya is mistaking the non-eternal for the eternal. I mean, that's a common experience. Everything in this world, intellectually we know, is not eternal. But mysteriously, we remember only what we superficially experience. So we mistake the non-eternal for the eternal, and for the eternal for non-eternal. Both ways it happens. So mistaking non-eternal for the eternal. I can give an example. Actually, all worries and many kinds of anxieties are based on this particular aspect of avidya. A person falling sick, he knows intellectually very well that he will be cured. There is a remedy for it. But when a patient becomes too worried about his illness, for that split second is mistaking this non-eternal reality, that is sickness or illness, to be something eternal. So unless we may not declare it, though if we speak to a patient who is too much worried about his health or her health, or too much complained or concerned, overtly concerned, at the back of all this fear is the feeling that I am doomed to remain sick, unhealthy all my life. This hidden, concealed fear is always there. That's an example of avidya, means mistaking the non-eternal for the eternal, and mistaking the impure for the pure, the painful for the joyful, and not the self and the non-self for the self. So sometimes we mistake the impure for the pure. This often happens, Anything that we consider to be pure in our in our empirical experience is actually not so very pure. Even the physical body, we won't go further beyond that. It's very painful even for people to hear actually. If you look at the physical body, now suppose we can you imagine a beautifully well packed bag or box that is recently delivered from Costco or Amazon, but it contains only what our physical body contains. We won't go near it. Actually, really speaking, there is nothing that the physical body contains that you will not wash your hands after touching. It's impossible. Or you may use sanitizer, of course, in these pandemic days. Or you may wash with alcohol, soap, 20 minutes or 28 seconds, or not minutes, seconds, of course. This is a reality. Now, but then we don't remember that all the time. That is a mysterious, a curious example of avidya, mistaking the impure for the pure. Remember, you should know, I want to make this point. Sometimes this could be wrongly interpreted, misunderstood frequently. Yoga philosophy looks upon human body as something filthy, dirty. Not at all. In fact, Yoga and Vedanta both agree on certain points, very important points. And that is, physical body, if you look upon physical body as the only and the most wonderful thing in this world, you are wrong. You are equally wrong if you neglect the physical body. That is the other part of it. So you find, of course, there is an interesting episode in the Kumara Sambhava, which is one of the classical works of Kalidasa, the greatest literary genius of Sanskrit literature, Sanskrit literary tradition, Kalidasa. So there's an interesting verse there that api kriyartham sulabham samit kusam jalani visnani vithikshamaniti api sasaktya tapasi pravartase shariramadyam khalu dharma sadhanam. The last part of this verse is considered to be very important by doctors, by the Ayurvedic professionals. Because what it means is, this human body is the greatest and the most sublime and the most effective instrument for doing good things, for doing the right things. The physical body. This physical body is important for us. Then only we can study Yoga Sutras, we can discuss Yoga Sutras. We can think of the impurity of this body only when we make use of this impure body. So body becomes very wonderful, pure, when dharma sadhanam, when we use it for something, for a sublime purpose. So the story, of course, I can explain the story. This is a story about Uma, the Parvati, doing ascetic practices for getting Shiva as her husband, and Shiva takes the form of, it comes incognito as a spiritual ascetic, and tests her tapasya, her penance, her austerities, faith and devotion. So he is trying to see api kriyartham sulabham samit kusam jalani visnani vidhikshamanite. He is inquiring about the welfare. Do you have enough water to take bath, for ablutions, for your ceremonial ablutions in the morning, in the evening? Are you doing all these austere practices by your own strength? And in fact, he actually, because Uma, she was Parvati, she was doing extreme ascetic practices. So Shiva, coming incognito, tells her Shariramadyam khalu dharma sadhanam. So this is the word in the words of Kalidasa. So a great commentator called Mallinatha, he wrote a Sanjeevani commentary. There he says, Adya Mukhyam Sadhanam, means this physical body is the most important, the most effective instrument, tool in our hands for doing dharma, for going beyond the phenomenal, beyond the material, beyond the physical. So in that respect, body is something very important, very sublime, because healthy, strong body becomes a great tool for doing wonderful things, for one's own spiritual progress, and also for doing good for others. So in that respect, it is something very wonderful. We should remember that Vedanta or yoga do not ignore the role of physical health for the right purpose. But that should not be the supreme goal of human existence. That's what is implied here. So one example is this, mistaking the impure for the pure and the painful for the joyful. That is anitya, ashuchi, dukkha, anatmasu, nitya, shuchi, sukha, atmakhyadi, avidya. This is the sutra. It's a long sutra. So first we mistake the non-eternal for the eternal, we mistake the impure for the pure, and we mistake the painful for the joyful. Very often, when we experience something, we forget that that experience can be the cause of unpleasantness or painful experiences in future that we may forget. That is natural. If we look at life as a whole from a purely materialistic point of view, it is always possible for us to make this mistake. We may mistake the right for the wrong and the wrong for the right. Both ways it happens. Sometimes something can give us temporary joy. But it could sometimes be a trap. It could be a temporary absence of pain, a postponement of pain, a painful experience. After some time, the joyful experience may give way to something unpleasant. Then mistaking what is not Atman to be the Atman. What it means, again what I said, that is mistaking this body to be the ultimate reality. This body as the only thing to be cared for. That is the implication here. Of course, this avidya has got different interpretations in other systems of Indian philosophy. Avidya is sometimes called viparya. So there's a klesha. Here, the false knowledge. That is also one interpretation. The Samadhipada you find avidya is false knowledge. Something which doesn't correspond to its real form. That is also called avidya. And then next one is asmita. Drik darshana shaktyoha ekatmada iva asmita. Egoity. They mean the apparent identity of the power of the seer and the power of seeing. So what it actually means, is, of course, there are different interpreters. Most of the commentators like Vyasa have interpreted the sutra as the identity of Purusha and Buddhi. So Vyasa says Drik Shakti is Purusha, Darshana Shakti is Buddhi. According to Vijnana Bhikshu, that's our own commentator, he says Darshanam does not mean anything seeing. So what it means is our identity of our real nature with the body and the intellect. That is what is called asmita. Then sukhanushayi ragaha. Attachment is that which follows the experience of pleasure. When we experience something and that experience gives us joy, in ordinary sense, material joy, then the mind gets attached to it because that pleasant experience becomes a strong obsessive vritti or impression in the mental system. The mind is always chasing, going after that pleasant vritti. So whatever we experience, the experience is gone, but vritti remains. This is how our mind functions according to Patanjali's system. We have an experience. Well, that experience produces joy or happiness. The experience is gone, but it has sown a seed in our mental system. And that mental system is the repository of all impressions, memories, and tendencies. That tendency will remain there. Later on, it could be after several years, and according to yoga, maybe after several life cycles. When we encounter a similar experience, then this latent, this vritti remaining the mental system comes to the surface and it connects again with a similar experience outside. So the experience is repeated. It's called, that is action, it's vritti or tendencies, impressions, and then again the same experience is continued, and every experience strengthens and reinforces these latent vrittis. And according to Patanjali's system, some of these tendencies or samskaras are found to be working out in this life itself. Some of these tendencies are deposited in a repository of these samskaras called karmashaya. We will discuss that later. Many of us strong likes and dislikes with their roots in previous life. Those tendencies are deposited in karmashaya, it's called. Karmashaya samskaras. They may not find expressions in this life itself. If a strong tendencies may not always work out in this life, but they will find expression in some other future life cycles. So if a person feels a strong inclination towards, let us say, spiritual life, is a proof that that person has prayed, meditated, read mystical books, spiritual books, and develop a real, sincere, earnest desire for spiritual life. Sometime in the past, it could be in any religious tradition, in any spiritual tradition, it could be. And that person takes birth after several life cycles in another culture. His mind will connect with identical spiritual tendencies and vrittis and samskaras that he encounters. So what we have already in our mental system, that we seek out outside. If our mind has a lot of spiritual ideas, then it will be seeking identical ideas outside. It may be, when we go to a library, we will be looking for similar books which are conducive to reinforcing those healthy, good samskaras that already stored up in our mental system. When we want to talk to people, we may have a tendency to talk to people, to associate with people whose associations will again help us to re-experience what we experienced in previous life cycle. That's why the samskaras that are already latent, present in our mental system, our mind will be seeking those similar samskaras out in the external world. That's it. And similarly, unfortunately, vice versa is also correct. If our mind is not so very good, then mind will be looking for those things outside. That's an important thing to remember. So, of course, there are many verses in the Gita. I have already quoted this. In one verse is in the 6th chapter, Tatradam Buddhisam Yogam Labhade Pauradehikam Yatadecha Tato Bhuya Samsiddho Kurunandana. Lord Krishna says, when a person is reborn again, his mind, his Chittam, his mental world is full of good samskaras, healthy samskaras. And if he is walking in front of a place where meditation is taking place, he may feel like stepping into that place. And if his samskaras are strong, it may be the beginning of a new practice. Every day he will start coming to the same place to meditate. If he goes to a library, if he happens to read a good book, if he gets strongly attached to that idea, that means in previous life he has already done a lot of work. That's what Vijnana Bhikshu says, without previous experience, you will not be able to start anything new. That means it's just the opposite of what John Locke said, tabula rasa. Just the opposite of what the British philosopher John Locke says. According to him, every child is born with an empty table, tabula rasa. Yoga Sutra says the opposite is true. That is, we are born with a slate that is already well written. We can easily understand this. Suppose you are a teacher in a school and teaching philosophy or literature or history or geography. If a student suddenly shows extreme interest and familiarity or is able to quickly grasp what you are teaching, there are many ways of explaining that phenomenon. Either that students, a child's parents are teachers, they are helping him with these lessons in his home, that is one explanation. Or maybe the student, that child has already shown a great interest in reading books on geography. Maybe he is home at a good library and have a number of books on that particular subject. Maybe he may develop the habit of reading books on geography. That's why he's showing an extreme interest, an aptitude and a quick ability to grasp quickly whatever you are teaching. Without any of these logical explanations, suddenly you may find sometimes students coming from circumstances where none of these conditions may apply. So Yoga Sutra will tell you, well, that person has studied or become familiar with this subject in previous life cycles. That is according to Vijnana Bhikshu. These commentators have extended the possible descriptions and interpretations of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. That's why Sukhanushayi Ragaha and Dukkhanushayi Dvesha, the opposite. Aversion, that is Dvesha, is that which follows the experience of sorrow. Here also the same. If we had some kind of unpleasant experience, then that unpleasant experience can manifest in the form of irrational hatred, tendency to avoid, to move away from something that has given unpleasant experience sometime in the past. Of course, any psychologist will agree with you, a psychiatrist also. But the point is, Yoga Sutra takes human life in a more holistic, integral way. So there are many cases of obsessions and phobias which cannot be explained on the basis of life experiences of this life. So if you apply the same logic, then what it means is it is coming from another source. Same logic applied, but you extend the possibility of interpretation beyond this life cycle. So that's again, sometimes you find people with a natural attraction for the negative. That's a natural exuberant dvesha, dukkhanushayi dvesha. Something has given a person dukkha, unpleasantness. Of course, a different kind of tendency is explained by Dostoevsky. I often quote Dostoevsky because he has very profound insight into the human mind. In the Brothers Karamazov, he says, a kind of natural, inherent, impassioned attraction for the evil, for the wrong. That also you find. How do you explain this? There, Yoga Sutra will appear to stand on Sishasana. There is no logical explanation for this. But there also, Yoga Sutra, if you extend the possible interpretations of Yoga Sutra in other commentators like Tattwamayananda and others, the commentators will say, if our mental system, Chittam, has a rich deposit of the negative tendencies, then they express themselves strongly. And even if you are intellectually convinced that what we are doing is not good for us, even if you are intellectually fully convinced that what we are doing is not the right thing to do, it will bring only problems for us, still we won't be able to do the right thing. That's because the previous samskaras are so strong, so very often it is the deeper layers of the mental lake. Now my mind is compared to a lake, different layers. At the deeper level, there are many layers of dust and bacteria. Suppose you think of a lake with 100 feet, 5 feet pure water on the surface, but 95 feet impure water. It's no use. If you dip little deeper, then you get unpleasant water. So that's the explanation given by the commentators. But there is a way to change our own mental system. That is the greatest contribution of Patanjali's system. We can change our destiny. We can change our character. We can start a new psychological life, a new spiritual life, any day, any moment. If you understand the true implications of this Kriya Yoga. That's why Kriya Yoga first, Tapas Swadhyaya Ishara Pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. And the most important aspect of this Kriya Yoga is, at the physical level, if you start doing something good for us and good for others, that physical activity can produce spiritual energy. Now we have a lot of freedom as to what we want to do at the physical level. But we do not have the same amount of freedom as to what we are going to do at the intellectual level, mental level. Mind doesn't always listen to us. But at the physical level, we have more freedom, more autonomy. Whether you should drive, you should take this road or that road, this highway or that highway, is more or less within your choice. But you don't have that kind of freedom to what book I am going to read, because you will be able to read only what your mind is ready to read. Often we are not able to read what we want to do. We are not ready to do what we want to do. Mind will create an obstacle. But at a physical level we have more freedom. Not that we have complete freedom, but much more freedom than the mental level. So Kriya Yoga helps you to start our spiritual life right at the primary school level. That is, if a person wants to change his destiny, do something good. It could be going to the nearby temple or a church or any place of worship, doing something by which you won't get anything in terms of material profits or results. But that activity will produce an unseen result. And that unseen result will generate spiritual energy. So, if you deposit at the physical level, you are benefited at the spiritual level. That is the implication of the Kriya Yoga, and we will discuss later, because this discussion will continue in the coming session. Thank you. Now we are open for discussion. Most welcome.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Yeah.
Swamiji, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So, my first question is, so earlier today we were talking about how the anubhuti of leaving this body in past janmas, past experiences, is what drives human to the fear of of leaving this body experience. But isn't it true that this could also be experienced from a pratyaksha standpoint, where we see other people leaving their bodies and we see the difficulty that is experienced by others around them, by us with our relationship with them. So how does that match with this?
Okay. No, normally, you are right. The question is very logical. See, when we see death of a person, you see, if you talk to somebody who's managing a crematorium, or doctors who are attending in hospice or in hospitals, they know it for a fact. But even with those people, there is a lingering feeling, but it's not going to happen to me. It is again, Abhinivasa, it could be not always expressed, but deep down at the mental level, it is always there. Because without that, another important truth is, no human being can live. It's an important to remember. In fact, that's why these two facts are there. On the one hand, we are eternal. From a spiritual perspective, we are eternal. We cannot die. We are immortal. We are eternal. We are not this body. We are something that goes far beyond this body, that goes far beyond mind or intellect. That's the reality. So that gives us the feeling, well, I'm eternal. I can withstand anything. I will cure my disease. I shall live long. That's there. But the fear also is there. Slightest, I'm not getting enough sleep. I may lose my money. The banks may collapse. I may become a pauper. I may not get a new job. All these, they are not immediate, but the other end of the thread is linked to the fear of a big calamity. Now, according to Vijnana Bhikshu, what he says is, remember, he's not putting it as a very scary fact. Doesn't want to scare you. It is a very philosophical, very calm and quiet and very sedate, very impassioned statement of a fact, of a psychological fact. Nothing scary about it. Because Yoga Sutra actually wants to remind you that you are something that goes far beyond this body. You are the Purusha. Of course, Yoga Sutra is linked to Vedanta. Yoga Sutra is a springboard to Vedanta. That should be understood. It's a prelude to Vedantic philosophy. So the point is, this, once you understand that this is the root of every possible kind of unnecessary concern, unnecessary irrational concern, worry, or fear, it is linked to this. That's what Patanjali says. Patanjali doesn't put it in so many words, but that's what Vijnana Bhikshu says. Now, another thing, even a person witnesses the reality of death every day, he doesn't relate it to himself. He relates to others. Intellectually he knows. Everyone knows. Even child will know. But that intellectual understanding doesn't really go very deep when it comes to our own emotional life. Remember, man is not a very rational human being. It is wrong to say man is very rational. What we know to be a fact, our intellectual understanding doesn't always help us at the emotional level. If we really helped, we have no problems really. We have no problems. Then that's the main problem. I've always mentioned is the conflict between what we know and what our mind permits us to do. It's a big conflict. If you could always make use of our knowledge, there will be no problem in the world. That's because our emotional world, our emotions don't always permit us to make use of our intellectual understanding. That's a fact. And when you study Yoga Sutras, for example, you suddenly come to know it's a fact. The greatness of any classic, the philosophy or literature or anything is, when we read it, oh, after all, it's a fact. When you read Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or Shakespeare or any philosopher, literature or anything, Kant or Shankaracharya, if you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, when you read it, oh yes, it's a fact. You feel a grudging admission of the reality of what you are reading. That shows it's a great classic. So when you read Yoga Sutra, what happens, suddenly we are able to detect something that is going on in our own mind. And that helps us to develop a higher faculty, a self-analyzing faculty. We will be able to analyze our own mind and we will be able to live a very healthy psychological life. That is the great contribution of Yoga Sutras. It helps you to use the flashlight into dark corners of our own mind. Remember, there is nothing scary about it. Well, you should not get away with the impression that the Yoga Sutra talks about your fear of death all the time. Not at all. It simply tells you a philosophical, psychological fact. That's the idea behind.
Very nice explanation.
Yeah.
I have one more question. Yes. So towards the end, you were saying one way to change our destiny, our character, our mental system is we can start a new psychological, spiritual life anytime if we start Kriya Yoga.
Yeah.
Now, Kriya Yoga is like a buzzword today, right? Many people are using Kriya Yoga in many different ways. Yeah. What do you actually mean by Kriya Yoga?
No. I know. I already explained this in my earlier classes. Please listen again. Tapa Swadhyaya Ishwar Pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. This is the first sutra. This is the door through which you enter the world of yoga. Tapa means austerity. Swadhyaya means, well, technically it means reading Onkara. Sorry, not reciting Onkara. Pranava. When you read in the translations, Swadhyaya may be interpreted as chanting Pranava, Onkara, etc. It's not the script in which it is written that is meant. It is the sound that is meant. Onkara. Now, actually, it has got an extended meaning. Any sacred word, symbol. It depends upon your own religious traditions, your own spiritual traditions, any religious tradition, spiritual tradition, even non-religious traditions also do have word symbols, sacred word symbols. When you chant it with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, you generate healthy vibrations which becomes spiritual energy. Now, that is one way of generating healthy spiritual tendencies in our mental system. So when you read or listen to something sacred, and when you listen to it with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, immediately your mind generates a lot of spiritual energy. That happens. When you read a book, Gita, Upanishad, the Sermon on the Mount, or Dhammapada, any Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Vedantic tradition, anything you read with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, suddenly you are putting some money in your spiritual bank. We are generating spiritual asset, spiritual vibrations, tendencies. And that will slowly increase the amount of spiritual tendencies in the mental system. And as we increase the amount of spiritual tendencies in our mental system, you will feel less and less conflict when you undertake any noble task, whether meditation, prayer, or anything. That is idea. So slowly our mind begins to accumulate a lot of spiritual tendencies, spiritual impressions. Normally, mind has got these two types of tendencies, good and bad. Something that helps you in your spiritual life, something that creates a stumbling block. The stumbling block is a result of negativity, negative tendencies, negative impressions. And if your mind is enthusiastic about doing something good, whether meditation or prayer or helping somebody, that means mind has a surplus of healthy spiritual tendencies. You increase the amount of spiritual tendencies and mind will have no conflict. And in direct proportion to the increase of spiritual tendencies, the conflicts also go down and mind feels inner tranquility and peace. That's what happens. That's why Kriya Yoga is the stepping stone, because there is scope for you to generate spiritual energy by doing good physical activities. As I mentioned earlier, there is more autonomy. I will meditate. I tell you, many people believe I should meditate, I should do Kundalini. It is absolute, don't mind, I tell you, absolute craziness from yoga perspective. You cannot start with Kundalini raising, you cannot start with meditation. First, you should make your mind ready for meditation. If a person, tomorrow onwards I shall meditate for 2 hours, and of course I don't want to prolong this, but I have come across many unfortunate cases for youngsters facing serious problems because they believe that they should start their spiritual life with meditation. Meditation can be properly taken up only after going through some preliminary early steps. Mind should be ready for meditation. Before that, one should feed the mind with some good tendencies, good impressions. Such a mind will cooperate with you, will be your friend. When you try to meditate, your mind will tell you, okay, fine, go ahead. Your mind will tell you, which in real sense means no conflict. Otherwise, your mind will catch you by the throat. If you're watching TV, your mind doesn't disturb you. If you do computer game, your mind is okay. The moment you try to meditate, the mind suddenly turns against you. Why? The same mind. Because the mind is not willing to help you when you do something that's really good for you. So your mind becomes your friend only when it cooperates with you, when you do something that is really good for you. That's the idea behind it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maharaj, there is a question on YouTube from Meena. Very similar question.
Yeah.
If phobia and fear can be from some karma, if not in this life, but can be from the past life, then the question is there mind activity or dream which becomes the basis of expression of previous life events to phobia?
Yeah. Okay, now, I shall explain. This is a very important question. First of all, mind is the word we use in English, but the word Chittam is used in Yoga Sutras. Here, the word Chittam implies the 4 departments of the mental world. What are the 4 departments? One is the mind acting as this or that. So I shall try to explain this in the light of an example given in Vedanta. When you see an object in front of you in semi-darkness, actually it is a pillar. You may mistake it for a human being. So when you have not reached this pillar, from a distance you are speculating, oh, it's a human being or something else. Your mind is working. It is sankalpa vikalpatmika antakarana vritti mana. This is a definition. This is mind. This is one aspect of mind. Another aspect, you have reached the place and you suddenly realize it is not a human being, it is a pillar. Then you decide, you come to a decision, a verification that it is a pillar, not a human being. That buddhi is working. Buddhi means nisyatmika antakarana vritti. A mental vibration tendencies that act as a desiderative faculty. That is buddhi. And then when you remember, I have seen this pillar last week, you are actually recollecting it from your for a memory system, and you identify yourself as the one person who has seen this in maybe last week. You are identifying yourself aham. So mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. These are 4 departments. Now we know what happens when a person moves from one life cycle to another life cycle. What happens is, if physical body dies and the senses, like example, the eyes, the ears, all the 5 senses of perception, they also disappear. But the samskaras and tendencies and impressions gathered by these 5 senses and mind are carried forward intact into next life. That is our subtle personality. That is subtle personality. The gross personality is the human being, the 6 feet tall person. The subtle personality is the real personality. I mean, the personality behind the personality. The real personality behind the physical personality. That is subtle body called Sukshma Sharira. Now, this is actually, this travels from one life cycle to another life cycle. And these tendencies will survive death. That's why when we do certain things, even children showing extreme aptitudes, extreme tendencies like natural aptitude for certain arts, artistic skills or other tendencies, without any explanation from the genetic perspective, either from maternal or paternal traditions. That's an example of these Sukshma Sarira, these tendencies carrying forward from previous life cycle to another life cycle. So what a person may have seen certain things in previous life. The eyes have gone, but that vision, the experience of seeing, and it creates a strong impression in the mental system. That strong impression is carried forward when the person is born as a child, and that child, after some years, may see something similar, and those previous tendencies are again brought back to the surface of the mental system, and that's what we call memories. According to Yoga and Vedanta, when you recollect or remember something with a distinct form and name, that memory is coming from this life. But there are people who have distant, vague, but strong recollections without associating with name and form. Those memories are coming from previous life cycles. When you can remember something and also remember the name and form, it may be from your childhood memory. You may have seen and heard. But memories without any association with name and form could be coming from previous life cycles. That is what Vijnana Bhikshu implies when he says, without a previous experience, you cannot have a new experience. There is nothing new. That's what he says. That's why he says pratyaksha, anumana, agama, either through direct perception, inference, or verbal testimony. Without any of these, without any explanation on the basis of these epistemological tools, there are many experiences that you inherit when you are born. They come from another source. That's the point. So it's a very comprehensive, exhaustive study of the entire mechanism of human mind and mental life.
Thank you, Maharaj. There is one more question here by Indu. She requests you to touch upon the Hatha Yoga tradition.
Yeah.
Tell a little bit more about the Hatha Yoga tradition in this context.
Hatha Yoga is mentioned only in one sutra. Patanjali Yoga Sutra in 4 chapters together got 195 sutras. sthira sukham asanam. So asanam as such is mentioned in the Ashtanga Yoga. Of course, according to modern scholars and historians, great works like Gherendra Samhita, Hatha Yoga Pratipika, Shiva Samhita, some of these textbooks are the Bibles of Hatha Yoga were written in later times. Of course, they claim that Shiva taught all the yogi postures. Well, I won't enter into that debate. What it means is the real purpose of asana is to be able to live long, that's one thing, that's an eventual benefit. But the real purpose is to sit for a long time and without feeling any fatigue or effort. So in a very effortless, restful manner, you should be able to sit for a long time to practice pranayama, dharana, dhyana. That is the purpose. For that you need some physical exercises. Then only you will be able to sit for a long time without any effort. That's very important. Sukham is very important there. If a person, sometimes you find people practicing Hatha Yoga. I've seen some people sitting in our shrine here with muscles, bulging muscles, lot of effort. You can feel the effort and the pain on their face. That is not asana. One should be able to forget one's own body. Then only you are actually enjoying sitting like that. When you feel the physical presence, when you feel your body, then you are not enjoying it. So one should be able to sit for a long time in an effortless manner. Sthiram, for a long time. Sukham means effortless. It becomes a joyful experience. Because your purpose is going beyond the body. There's a purpose. That is the only definition you find in Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Later, these great works on Hatha Yoga, like Hatha Yoga Pratipika, Gherendra Samhita, all these developed various. It's wonderful. That's also another science. It has its own place. Okay, it's wonderful. Okay.
Swamiji, could you clarify in the Samadhi Pada there is a discussion of the 9 antarayas, and here we discuss the kleshas. How are the two related, if at all?
Yeah, antaraya and vyadhisthana, etc. You find disease or maybe laziness or feeling that you are not reaching the goal or not being remained for a long time or even wrong ambitions, delusions, bhranti darsana, anavasthitatva, etc. Now all these are in a way natural obstacles that any spiritual person may have to face. Some of them are linked to kleshas, no doubt, but kleshas are deeper analysis of the fundamental challenges that every spiritual person will have to face when he takes to yoga. The other ones are obstacles that any spiritual person will have to face in any tradition, not particular to yoga. These antarayas or 9 obstacles I mentioned in Yoga Sutras, they become obstacles to achieving Chitta Prasada. So all these are explained. They are only in that particular context. But you should understand that these 9 obstacles, one way or other, every spiritual seeker in any religious tradition will have to face. But Pancha Kleshas mentioned are particularly with the yoga context, in the context of yoga.
Thank you, Swamiji.
So we will conclude now. Thank you for the questions. We will have discontinued discussion next session. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
The recording has stopped.